Wait hocam.
Okay. Yes, 4 minutes. Waiting. We have to wait better. So 3 minutes more. Thank you, Adem Bey. You started the recording. And dear hocalarım, thank you for giving us your time. I know we all have a very, very dense period because this is towards the end of the semester. I know that. Thank you.
Thank you hocam. It is really fun to and exciting to present in this Nomad campus. I hope it will be beneficial for the audience as well.
I'm sure hocam. I'm sure.
I am seeing some familiar names.
Yes. Johnson is one of the few students switching on the camera.
Thank you.
And Osama. I saw
Yes.
also Osama's face priorly in the prior session. Merhaba hocam. Efsun hocam.
Hi hocam.
Hi. Okay, dear participants, again, thank you being with us during our seminar series in Nomad Campus. Just a reminder, very small reminder, I already shared in the chat box a link, a YouTube link. These recordings we are doing here is going to be uploaded there that you can re-watch these recordings whenever you want and so on. So, and then for the second half of the seminars day today, I'm giving the word to Belinda Torres Hocam. Belinda Hocam meant maybe it could take a little bit longer. So if you
maybe
have
not hocam.
maybe not, okay. But if you have limited time, that means you can leave the meeting whenever you want if you need it, because the recordings will be prepared and you can rewatch it. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, Belinda Hocam, the word is yours.
Thank you, Elif hocam. I'm going to talk about not very different, some different topics, some new topics. I hope I can wrap them all up in a very structured way. We will see. Let me share my screen. Hopefully it is visible. Yes, thank you, Elif hocam. Yes, thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about contemporary city dwellers or dwellings. But as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about various topics. Of course, when we are talking about dwellings, first maybe I need to introduce myself. My name is Belinda Torres. Some of you already know that. my master's and PhD is about computational design in housing. So more or less, I have studying housing for the last 20 years. And focusing on different aspects, focusing on the new technologies, focusing on the vernacular, and how we can recreate different aspects of housing in different ways. So in this sense, the presentation is going to reflect some of the discussions we have been making in these past 20 years. So of course there are different names there we can see for the dwelling houses, and a dwelling is a self-contained unit of accommodation used by one or more households as a home, such as a house, apartment, mobile home, houseboat, or other substantial structure. So says the Wikipedia. The point is, all of those terms are in fact used instead of one another. But basically, what we are going to talk about today is a basic shelter. What is that shelter? What is that housing issue that we are dealing with, and how it can be created or used, and how we can analyze this issue. So it is basically a shelter, as you can see here. And home and house, again, two different aspects. And usually home is the place which one's affections are centered, and it is more about the feeling. But also the sheltering issue is critical in that sense as well. And then moving to housing, we can see interesting and different housing examples throughout the history of architecture. This is a relatively new project, BIG's Project 8 in Copenhagen. And the issue about housing and public housing and mass housing is, again, one of the most important things we architects deal throughout the time. And with the increase in the population and the urban growth, these kind of housing projects became more prominent, and of course public housing became one of the most important issues. Especially the social housing is one of the most important issues that we deal or struggle or research about. So what I'm going to present today is, I'm going to first focus on the existing housing examples, and I will try to explain a little bit about the contemporary dwellings and housings. In that sense, I am very sorry. I am going to share again. Yes, sorry for the interruption. I'm going to share again, and I hope you are seeing it. So I'm going to talk about the existing housing examples, and I'm going to talk about vernacular architecture first, and then I'm going to talk about Industrial Revolution and housing after Industrial Revolution, because Industrial Revolution is a kind of a breaking point in our lives, not only in the architecture but in all senses of our lives. It is a kind of a breaking point. Then I'm going to talk about two different things. First, I'm going to talk about informal housing, squatters and slums, and mass housing. So from two different aspects, I would continue to present. And I'm going to talk about some experimental examples from 1930s to today, so-called futuristic examples from 1930s, the experiments they have done, is at least from a few projects that I really like. I want to show them and discuss them a little bit, and talk about contemporary approaches. Of course, trying to cover all these issues is a little bit, it might take longer, but I will try to be fast and try to wrap them up quickly. But of course, the one of the critical points here is the discussions is a little bit on the sustainability aspect, and also for me it is on the innovation aspect as well. So while going over these, I will try to focus on a little bit, not too much, on the sustainability and innovation aspects as well. So when we are talking about innovation, innovations should be socially, sustainably, and economically constructed. Otherwise, it cannot work. So when we are looking at the emerging recognition of sustainable innovation, it is not just new concepts, but it is also how we are using or commercializing the technologies, and how we are making them widespread, and how this society is accepting them, or how we are using them. So it doesn't have only one aspect. Why this is important is that these innovations are step by step, they are in our lives, and with the technology, we are seeing them in architecture or different aspects, and in the contemporary times, it is really important to see at least the traces of those innovations, especially in sustainability and in different approaches. So when we are talking about dweller or user or household, we are talking about the people who are living in the same house. And the critical point here is that the household includes all the persons who occupy a housing unit. But in the last 200, 300 years, we can easily say that the household typology have changed. And we have different types of occupants, we have different types of lifestyles and needs, and the occupants share and use the space differently. So these changes, of course, affected the housing and the design in the housing as well. And especially after the Industrial Revolution, and especially after, or let's say in the last 20 years, these changes became much more prominent, not only on the other parts of the world, but also in Turkey as well. We are seeing much smaller families. Of course, in the pandemic, things have also changed a little bit, but the issue is right now in the contemporary architecture, we are seeing different type of developers, we are seeing different type of architecture, and we are seeing different type of users and households using the housing, sharing them in various ways. So socioeconomical factors for or features for the housing types are in that case again important, because the affordability and the income and household employment and income are basic factors, because especially in the social housing or in some of the topics that I'm going to go over, like in the informal housing, all those squatter and slum settlements, we are seeing the different affordability levels, different income levels, and how this is affecting the lives, and how it is in fact creating the characteristic of the housing types, and also a kind of segregation. And when we are looking at again the history of architecture, the first point is vernacular architecture, and until Industrial Revolution, we can say that all the architecture were in some sense vernacular, because vernacular architecture is the architecture that is designed based on the local needs, availability of the construction materials, and reflecting local traditions. So what is important here is that it relied on design skills and tradition of the local builders, and the knowledge of this architecture passes from generation to generation with trial and error methods. So there were no formal architects, there were no structured or formed architectural systems. You have the material, you have the climate, you have the culture, and those three important points were the three pillars of vernacular architecture. Based on the availability of the resources and the craftsmanship of the local users or builders, the material that are around the site were used to build the housing, which also reflects the needs and response to the climatic conditions. In my courses, I show this image a lot because this is a very, I think, expressive image. And based on the use what kind of material they are using, how they are building the houses on the land or elevated, or what kind of material they use, if it is stone or adobe or thatch or wood or different type of wood, or the form it is generated. Based on all these things, we can more or less guess what kind of climatic conditions they have, what kind of material they have, so what kind of environment they live. More or less we can guess those things. So it is really very pragmatic in that sense, and it's in its nature it is also sustainable, we can say it. Also the same thing is valid for for Turkish architecture. This is also an image for the vernacular examples in Turkish architecture. You can see them here. So where there are more wood, you can see wooden structures and wooden Turkish houses. But where there are less wood and more stone, you can see the stone, the masonry housing examples. And in the central parts where there are neither wood or stone, you can see these adobe houses or existing cave structures or existing structures that are carved and used as housing units. So more or less, the critical point in vernacular architecture is that it is very pragmatic. It is using the local material, and the local material naturally responds to the climatic conditions and helps people to live in a environmentally or comfortable spaces. So that is the important point. So the first settlements, we can say, I'm going to show you another example, but the caves and existing structures were used as first settlements. This is an image from Cappadocia, which lies in the central Anatolia, which is in the heartland of Turkey. So you can see all these existing structures, and underneath there are caves and even underground cities. And with this rock formation, it is one of the world's most striking and largest cave dwelling complexes. So the people have been using this area for thousands of years. And this is another vernacular example, Abyane village. This is from Iran. And it is characterized by that reddish hue. The village is one of the oldest in Iran, and again attracting numerous native and foreign tourists. And not only for the architecture, but also the reflection of the culture as well. When you look at the image of the city, you can see the material and the buildings themselves, but also the terrace formation and the way they are using the topography. But when you zoom into the users, you can also see the people with their traditional clothes and their long scarves and those skirts and pants they are using. So they are still using their traditional costumes. That is also one of the reflections of the this village. It is important to see these kind of things because right now when we are talking about vernacular architecture, the examples are decreasing. The well-preserved examples are really decreasing, especially in the last 20 years. Another example is this one, Çatalhöyük. This is one of the examples which was a very large Neolithical and Chalcolithical proto-city settlement in southern Anatolia. As you can see, it existed approximately between 7,500 and 5,700 BCs. The important point of this settlement is that it is near to Mount Hasan, which is also near to Cappadocia, in other side of Cappadocia, we can say. The importance of this settlement is this is one of the earliest and biggest settlement in Anatolia, and the socially formation of this settlement is in that sense very interesting, because there were no hierarchy between the users, men and women, so they were sharing and eating the same amount of food, and they were using the spaces. And when you look at the structures, they were composed of entirely of domestic buildings, with no obvious public buildings, which is also important because there were no hierarchy and or governance or religious dominance in that one, we can say it that way. And at maximum there were 10,000 people living in this area, but the average population seems to be 5 to 7,000 in times, or in a reasonable estimate, we can say. And the way they are using the houses were, as you can see here, they were entering from the roofs, and they were using the spaces while entering from the roofs. So there were no streets. The roofs of those settlements were used as streets, and it was also an interesting way to live. The material is mud brick. The houses are mud brick that were cramped together in an aggregate structure. So it is a kind of a clustered honeycomb-like maze. And as I mentioned, the rooftops were the streets, and the only source of ventilation were the openings from those roofs, as you can see. This is the existing image right now. So there were no apparent social classes, and there were no houses with distinctive features. This is also important because after the vernacular architecture examples, we are seeing those different examples of those kind of hierarchy, royalty, or religious hierarchy, we can say that. So the most, again, I mentioned that the most recent investigations also reveal little social distinctions based on gender and social status. So that is important in that one. Also, we can see in the vernacular architecture, there are different examples. For example, the left one is Mardin from Turkey, the right one is Matera from Italy. So you can see two different countries, two different cities, two different cultures and religion, and in the same time they have same or similar solutions, because the formation on the slopey side and the houses and buildings designed with the local stone, or how they are arranged in like these terraces without obstructing the other one's view and air is the critical method for the formation. So this is an image of Mardin from 1950s. And one of the most important thing here is that, as you can see here, the level is much more lower, and in time, based on the needs, additional. So it is a kind of an incremental housing. So based on the needs, additional levels will be added to the upper floors and have been added throughout the time. And again, this is the city of Matera, which is in Italy, again on a slopey side. So the main issue again here is the limitation of the material, and the material and the topography, the environmental conditions let you design the structures in this way. So it is really a very pragmatic approach to design. This is another examples. Again, two different countries. Again, Turkey and Italy. The left one is Urfa, Harran, and the right one is Alberobello. Of course, this is not as similar as Mardin and Matera, but more or less the formation of those conical roof buildings have some similarities. Uh, you can see these beehive houses in Harran. It is really interesting. It is in Şanlıurfa. And these houses were inhabited in the early Bronze Age. It is approximately 3rd millennium before Christ. And the design of those beehive adobe houses, they constructed entirely without wood because wood is very scarce on that region. And the design of these makes cool inside, suiting the climatic needs of the region. And it's thought to have been unchanged for at least 3,000 years. Some were still in use until 1980s. However, those remaining today are strictly tourist exhibits because new cities have been designed or built in Urfa and Harran, and these were only kept for touristic purposes. So for 3,000 years, we have used these kind of houses, and they were responding to the climatic needs and very comfortable. But in the last 40 years, we have stopped using this kind of settlements. And this is Alberobello. It is a small town in Bari. And the name of these buildings are called Trullo. And the limestone conical structures are examples of dry stacked construction, and these are dated around 14th century. So this is again Harran. Inside of that housing units, as you can see, the adobe, the conditions, the conical roof, so the heat rises up, and the cool air on the living height, you can feel it very comfortable. When we're talking about vernacular architecture, I usually focus on 2-3 things as well. So apart from the housing units designed with wood and stone and basic natural materials, it is interesting that humans try to build with every material they have found based on their needs. So I find this very tricky to explain, because naturally, we all know igloos, but when someone says that they are going to design a house using snow in a very cold environment, it doesn't seem very logical. But in fact, this is very logical, because the material you have there is that, and you are using them. And also the Inuits, they were traditionally the people of Canada's central Arctic and Greenlands. They have been using this method for again thousands of years, and the interior conditions were very comfortable with this kind of approach. So how they are building those snow igloos are the form of cottonade, and of course the snow itself, based on how you are constructing, creates a very comfortable air inside, and you can see the temperature from outside and inside may vary immensely, and it creates a very comfortable conditions living in. So of course, tents are one of the first examples of these kind of sheltering issues. But based on how you are building those tents are also important, and it also reflects the culture and your lifestyle. Usually, we are seeing this kind of tents. These are called tipis, or Indian tents, we can say. In the nomadic formations, of course, wood is used for the main structure, and they have a detachable cover, usually from animal skin, and usually from buffalo hide or an optional skin or sometimes cloth linings. It differs. And they are distinguished from other tents by two crucial elements: the openings at the top of and the smoke flaps, which allows the dweller to heat themselves and cook with an open fire. So in the central part there is this open fire, and on the upper part there is this smoke flaps. And the lining that is primarily used in the winter, which insulates. And again, the most important, one of the most important parts of these kind of tents is they are supporting the nomadic life of the people that are using, so they can be dismantled and they can be reconstructed again, or transported first and reconstructed again based on the movements, based on the lifestyle of the users, where they want to go from somewhere to somewhere. They have that kind of options. Of course, we are seeing this in different regions. This is yurt or ger, again with the same logic. As you can see, the structure, the body structure and the roof structure, it can be collected and dismantled and transported and used in different parts. So here you can see the details of the structure, how they are forming. On the center there is also an open fire here, or a fire, not open, but there is a fire on the central part. And you can see more storage areas or sleeping areas around, because the lifestyle, they are also nomadic, but they were not hunters, or they were not moving very frequently. In winter time they are moving somewhere, and in summertime they were moving another way. So the building seems to be much more structured and solid in that sense. So when we are looking at those vernacular examples, we are seeing vernacular material. So they are using the local material and natural material, and in that sense, the material is sustainable because they are using the material they can find around. Usually, the materials they use are wood, bamboo, stone, thatch, clay, adobe, mud brick, animal skin, etc. So wood, stone, and different types of adobe and thatch are the main elements. In some cases, concrete and cements are also used. But the most important issue here is that they knew how to use the material, and the knowledge is occurred and accumulated in time. So they have also developed the formation of the housing themselves. So they were designing for their lifestyle. If they need wider spans, they strong structurally stronger building, they built that. If they were designing movable or demountable houses, they were designing that. So it was important that they were designing with their needs and responding to the environment and climate. Also, we can see the, for example, usage of the same material in the Matera and Mardin examples, or Urfa and Alberobello examples. We were seeing similar ways of usage on different areas, but also wood is one of the main materials that have been used with all over the world. But we are seeing the usage in different areas in very different way. This is an example of a Turkish house. You can see it here, a typical Turkish house with its projected jumbas, with its window proportions, how it is formed, etc. This is a timber frame Middle German house in Klein Schöpenstedt, which probably I am not announcing very correctly. It is designed around 1900s, so you can see the size, you can see the way they are using the material, you can see the size and the formation of the spaces. They are much more introverted, and it is the material, even though it is the same, the way they are using is quite different. And also in a very hot climate, this is a traditional Malay house. You can see the usage of material, the creating of the semi-open or open spaces, or how they were trying to emphasize the climatic conditions inside the house much better in this sketch-like drawing. So the material, even though the material is the same, based on the environmental conditions, based on the needs, the formation of the houses has changed. So traditionally, the study of the vernacular architecture did not examine formally schooled architects, but instead that of design skills and tradition of local builders who were rarely given any contribution for the work. More recently, vernacular architecture has been examined by designers and the building industry in an effort to be more energy conscious with contemporary design and construction, part of a broader interest in sustainable design. So as definition, vernacular housing is naturally sustainable, and trained architects are inspired from the mentioned potential. But the issue is, again, what kind of sustainability, social, cultural, or usage of the material, or when we're talking about vernacular architecture, one of the most critical issue here is that in the last 100 years, with rapid urbanism, unplanned populations, and city growth and globalization, we see a great decrease in the vernacular architecture examples, especially in the last 20 years. The deterioration is in critical conditions all over the world. So apart from some of the protected areas, with the industrialization, we are not only losing the knowledge, but we are losing the existing examples as well. So it is also very critical. Since we are talking about sustainability, it is also important to mention. Sustainability has different aspects, and the important part is where is vernacular material, what is vernacular material and what is sustainable material. So if you are using stone or wood right now, would it make it sustainable? Because the number of people, the number of populations, and urbanizations and everything increased. So we need to find sustainable solutions and sustainable innovations in that sense. But sustainability is not doesn't have only one aspect. It has many aspects, from economics to ecology, politics, culture, and people need to accept. People need to use. It should be economic. It should be widespread, etc., etc. But we can learn from vernacular architecture for sure. So there are different approaches that that the architects, designers, and the users talk about vernacular. And there are three approaches that can be mentioned. One is that usage of natural and local material, re-evaluating and redefining the spaces based on where you are designing, and re-evaluating and redefining the traditions and culture. If you are not designing according to the user's tradition and culture, then it is really a little bit meaningless to design. Understanding and interpreting the vernacular by material, physical elements, and these traditional needs are some of the basic issues that we can deal with. Also, in the vernacular architecture, we can say that there is a deep respect and perfect connection with the nature environment and understanding of the user's need. This is also what should be reflected in the contemporary examples. In that sense, I'm going to show some examples again. This is B2 house by Hantu Mertekin. This is the Alkan reward receiver house and it is important that this house is really designed with some it is not exactly inspired from vernacular architecture, but the way it is used, the more modern architecture, it is really suited for the user's needs and the relation of the environment or the architecture of the buildings around it was really important, and it reflects the needs and the usage very effectively in that sense. And also different materials are sought in today, again, to make it more sustainable. Usage of bamboo is very widespread in some part of the world, because it is flexible and lightweight, and it can perform better during earthquakes than concrete. But also we can see that some of those examples are not really very well received, because the people want to see, in that sense, westernized house. They want to see big concrete buildings full of glass and steel and concrete, and they want to live the same way as other people. So it is not only as the material, but especially in examples like Indonesia, it reflects the lifestyle. So concrete seems to be much more well received in that sense. But there are different researches about material, especially even though I didn't put it here, Shigeru using paper. It is an interesting way to approach. Shigeru is a Japanese architect known for his innovative work with paper, particularly recycled cardboard tubes used to quickly and efficiently, especially after the disaster victims. He designed and built some housing examples. So it is really important how to use the material. So bamboo is a material, even though it is a very effective material, it is not very well received for some parts of the world. And there, with the technologies, there are new materials we can call smart materials, nanomaterials, biomaterials, etc. But these so-called intelligent or responsive materials, they need to be studied, and it is still very expensive, and it is not that widespread. And they have other aspects like sensor actuators or artificial muscles or electroactive polymers, etc., for them to work. So even though the development in the materials continue, so even though we are not only using the natural material, different materials are developed, but still it is not as widespread. And the reuse of material is critical at this point, especially in the sustainability. From the sustainability aspect, the recovery and reuse of materials existing on site, or detailing for future disassembly and reuse of buildings, just like in the vernacular nomadic examples, or the reuse of materials from managed sustainable sources. Those are some of the very important issues. So the use of recycled material wherever possible is one of the important points we have in the material aspect. So we have this vernacular architecture, and when we come to Industrial Revolution, it marks a major turning point in history, and almost every aspect of daily life was influenced in some way. In particular, average income and population began to exhibit unprecedented sustained growth, and the standard of living for the general population began to increase consistently for the first time in history. And of course, it did not begin to improve until the late 19th or 20th century, not immediately after the Industrial Revolution, but in time it increased immensely. So when we are looking at the industrial revolutions, the innovations, we can see that the material base, there were innovations in the inventions, and there were lots of innovations, and in the urbanizations we are seeing the developments and innovations. In sense of architecture, one of the most important point is that until Industrial Revolution, we were living more or less the same way for thousands of years, and after the Industrial Revolution, that has changed, because there are two main things that has changed. One is the transportation, and the other one is the usage of reinforced concrete and glass. So we were used to manufacture and design, manufacture and transport the materials. So that was important. So when we are looking at the industry towns, migration from rural to urban, we can see that new cities formed. That is also important, and new production techniques have been developed. And we started to talk about modularity, standardization, prefabrication, project management, and the mountable structures. But again, when in the base of it, what we are seeing is the transportation of good material and people. So the critical point here is that right now we were able to, with those trains and locomotives, the technology develops and it can be widespread everywhere. And with that, it comes the rapid urbanization, the population in the cities increased. You are seeing the Burner Mill town image on the right upper part, and you are seeing the factory image on the right bottom part showing the mass production. Here you can see it. This is Mill town, and this is the housing in that time. So those housing were the conditions were inadequate. There were inadequate infrastructure. The illnesses, poor living conditions were one of the important points. You can see the black smokes on the cities. So in the first time of the industrial revolutions, they were dealing with lots of problems. In the upcoming part, so there were two aspects. One is of course in time there were also other problems like the slave trades or the child labor or high concentration of workers without sanitations or infrastructure, etc., etc. So the life expectancy was very low, and the conditions were very poor at that time. But in the late 19th and 20th century, everything became much more, the life styles became much better because legislation had been drawn, the life conditions became better, etc. At this point, first, I need to mention about the new architecture approaches, and of course, I'm going to show two images from Mies van der Rohe. One is this Farnsworth House, which is a kind of one of the pioneers of these glass and steel houses with all these open spaces, and the other one is the Lakeshore Apartments, the apartment version of these houses, which in the upcoming years we started to see everywhere. So not exactly this type of apartments, but right now with the industrial revolution, we have started to see these high-rise apartments in all over the world. And another example is, of course, Unit d'Habitation by Le Corbusier, not only as a social housing project, but also as designing in with the modular and reflecting the Corbusier's vision. This was a project with the minimum size and how we are using the spaces and how people can live in that housing unit, how they can come together. So it is not only designing the house, but the lifestyle of the people as well. And it was really important. And we are seeing those kind of examples in the 19th, from 1930s. We have seen those kind of examples. And at this point, maybe two more mentions should be done. One is Ernst May's New Frankfurt project, in which it was also a very progressive and large development for this social housing, and also all the settlements that are related. Another point is from again from the same project, the Frankfurt kitchen, which also changed the functionality of the household problem, and developed the prototype of the modern installed kitchen by Margaret Lichowski, and again the Frankfurt project in Mainz. So These are some examples. And then we are seeing the gated communities, which I'm going to move to the informal settlements, because in one sense we have designed these high-rise buildings that or social houses and gated communities supporting different lifestyles and rich people. On the other aspect, there are those shanty towns, informal housing, slums. You can name it differently, but the lack of housing and people started to solve their problems by building their houses by themselves. So in the aspects of informal housing, those lack of physical services and infrastructure, and sometimes the lack of quality, is in the central point. Those are usually deprived areas, potential crime zones, and there are lots of safety and security problems in that one. This one is an image from the favelas. So, favelas are the informal settlements in Brazil, and it dated back to the 19th century, late 19th century, but from 1970s on, they have appeared much more rapidly. And the interesting part is that even though the infrastructure is inadequate, and even though they were informal and they were designed by the users themselves, you can see some similarities, small similarities with the vernacular architecture. Uh, as I mentioned in the Martin example, for example, they have built according to the needs, and the same logic applies here. This image is one that I like most because it is mentioning that based on the users, since they grow up, the house growth, it's grows incrementally related to the user's need. And but the problem here is of course the quality of the material and the quality of the structures, they're being structurally durable or strong, etc., etc. So it is a kind of different aspects in that sense. At that point, too, I need to mention this Kowloon Wall City because it is also very striking examples. It is demolished, and a new park has been designed in its place. But still, when you look at the project, the settlement, which grew in time and create this very dense, catastrophic site. And if you wish, I can also send you the link for this example. So it was in Hong Kong, and in its most dense time, again, ten thousands of people were living in this area. And there were lots of security problems, criminal issues, and unregistered people were living, and lots of crimes were mentioned that in that time on this area. And in Turkey, we also expect that kind of informal housing. From the 1950s on, we see this kind of examples. And it grew rapidly. The formation of this housing is, in that sense, later than the favelas in Brazil, but it has been occupying a huge part of the cities, and the problem is that they have also formed the street structures or the basic organization of the streets, because when they are demolished, they also have used the same systems and so on. So when we're looking at we look at the vernacular architecture, when we look at the aspects of informal housing, we are seeing lack of physical services and infrastructures. We are seeing a lack of quality in the material. We are seeing deprived areas, potentially crime zones, and we are seeing safety and security problems, as I mentioned. But also, different people are talking about the potentials or the problems of those informal housing, because they are saying that about a sixth of the world population, nearly 1 billion people, live in the slums, and they are mentioning that that number could double by 2030 if developed nations don't reverse course and start giving the issue serious attention. And in Cynthia Smith's quotation, we should not romanticize slums, but informal settlements can teach us a lot about society and the economy of resources. So what can we learn about those settlements is that their existing building stock accommodating more than 1 million people, and in most cases they have some similar features with vernacular architecture, but usually with poor material and without infrastructure. The innovations, the support on this household or on the housing, especially improving the physical quality and the services of this housing would create would be helpful to use this housing as well. Also, creating new opportunities with technology, politics, and individual touch were important. I can send you some readings related to that one, and also some formally some architects have used the same approach in that sense in the housing project. So in the informal housing, they were adding their own houses in time. And also, if you use it as a design strategy to design the structure part by the architects and to add the other half by the users, as Aravena did or as Elemental did in this incremental housing, it is also a kind of an interesting approach. And they are also saying that this is a kind of an opportunity for new houses, because we are building half of the good house and the other half can be designed and built by the users. And this is also a way to approach this housing. So this is another example. There were these informal houses and there were formal houses, those high-rise buildings, those high-rise modern housing as Le Corbusier designed. But there was also a kind of an interesting housing project, Prut Aigo, which they have also built according to these modern approaches, but it didn't work, and all these housing units were demolished in a very short time. It was a kind of a very iconic point as well. So while discussing the sustainability issues,
Belinda hocam, I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So while discussing the modern architecture and this high-rise building, also this project should be mentioned because even though it has the same feature as the other projects, because of the segregation, because of the users not being involved in design, or their lifestyle or their culture not related, or the sustainability, the social sustainability of the project is ignored, these housing blocks have been demolished, and it is a kind of an iconic point in the modern architecture. And when you research the depth of modern architecture, this is the iconic building you see in that sense. So this is also important. So why one building is flourishing and the other one is demolishing is because of the social sustainability. And to come again to contemporary and futuristic approaches, we can say that in the contemporary and modern architecture, we have in the modern architecture, we see those effects from the Industrial Revolution and industrialization. But when we look at the contemporary architecture means belonging to now, even though right now we are seeing on the left images are modern architecture, the right ones are contemporary ones. So you are seeing similar maybe housing examples, or you can see some similarities in those housing examples. But when we are talking about contemporary architecture, the issue is now we can design everything. No style is dominant, and different approaches: postmodernism, constructivism, expressionism, sustainable ecological architecture, or different aspects, different things can be used. And also, when technology is included, we can say that form became a little bit more dominant. Different forms can also be built, and enormous scales can be built, and so on. But when we look at the housing aspect, since the beginning of 2000, we are seeing those high-rise buildings and to be built. But when we discuss what kind of dwelling units people prefer today, or are they sustainable, or what kind of innovations they have, uh, smaller touches or innovations, personal innovations can be seen. But in fact, we are seeing similar housing units again all over the world, and in very large scales or in very small scales with different material. Again, usually glass, or sometimes wood, or maybe some curtain wall facades, etc., etc. But more or less, we are seeing similar examples. At this point, I want to talk a little bit about the experimental project from the 90s to today, and I'm going to finalize it with the contemporary approaches and examples. I have only 20 slides left, so I think I will finish in a very short time. Because the housing examples in 1930s are really interesting, because they were focusing on the feature and technology. They were trying to design different houses using developed materials, and they were experimenting this. So it is really interesting to see that. I'm going to show three examples. One is this Dymaxion house by Buckminster Fuller, which I will show the Dymaxion car as well. This was designed and developed by Buckminster Fuller to address several perceived shortcomings with the existing home building techniques. And Buckminster designed this with the consideration of ease of shipment and assembly. So a kind of in the core, it was one of the issues. And he named it Dymaxion to combine the words of let me say dynamic and maximum and dynamic and tension, so that he tried to emphasize the concepts he want to make in his inventions in that sense. So the building was designed with aluminum, in fact, and he designed this in 1930s and redesigned it in 1945, and it was placed. It was commissioned and used in different parts. And also, this Dymaxion car is another example. 3 prototypes have been made, and it was. He used donated money as well as his family inheritance to build this one. It is really important to mention that kind of issue as well. And this was also important because it has dealt with several challenges, but also the main issue about that one is not only to design a car, but also a movable house, and a kind of the pioneers of those kind of mobile housing. And even though it has lots of problems, and even though lots of improvements need to make, this is one of the iconic projects, we can say. Also, Futura House and Ventura House, designed by Suronen, that are really important. These are those UFO-like structures, prefabricated houses. They were built fewer than 100 in the late 60s and 70s. And the material Suronen experimented is fiberglass, reinforced polyester plastic, polyester polyurethane, and polymetal methacrylate, which I'm not pronouncing probably correct. So these have These are again prefabricated, and they have been transported to the areas that they are built. And based on the economic situation, they didn't develop more, but this was one of the again iconic futuristic approaches from 1960s, we can say. Another one is again by Mattis Ronen, the Ventura House. This is also a modular insulated transportable building system, and again the material was double layer fiberglass with 2 inches of polyurethane foam, and the floor is made of plywood. It was a very smaller unit, 45 square meter in total. But again, it was originally designed as a weekend house or a bungalow or a very portable housing unit, but they have used for different purposes. This is one of the experiments. They couldn't build it more than that. It was not that sustainable with the material and with the economic conditions of that time. Another example is from 1970s. In fact, this was not a very new idea that Watch designed, but it has inspiration from the traditional housing, these kind of settlement. But the way he designed those sheltering became relatively popular in the mid 70s, especially among the environmentalists. And so it was really interesting to see the green influence and the way they have created those organic forms in the houses in Switzerland. And it is interesting again to see buildings like that. And when we are looking at the contemporary examples, the sustainable design with contemporary architecture is built to be sustainable and environment friendly. And the main issue here is reducing the and trying to minimize the negative environmental impact of buildings through improved efficiency and moderation in the use of materials, energy development space, and ecosystem at large. So not only on the building of the buildings while we are constructing the buildings, but also when we are demolishing, we should think about and we should minimize the carbon dioxide and energy consumption. Of course, that natural materials were used in vernacular architecture. In the contemporary architecture, from smart material to various other materials are used. But also different design approaches, strategies, and concepts are used. Structures, new way of using the material, new construction techniques, especially CNC and 3D printing, smart and nanotechnologies are used. Also, new approach techniques and elements to support the sustainability are sought in this new contemporary architecture. But when we think about it, what about the knowledge from the vernacular, informal, or modern and contemporary settlements? How we are using them, or are we using them? Especially when we are talking about the time we are living right now in the pandemic, we face with the problems of the houses, which much more strongly, the small unfunctional interior designs, lack of green spaces, etc. Those are some issues we have. Even though we knew beforehand, it was kind of a very important and emphasized during that time. Or tiny houses were in fashion in different parts of the world. But when more people used, or we started to see how they built or where they built, etc., we started to see new problems being arise and so on. But when we are looking at this new architecture, I'm going to show a few examples of this one as well. So this is an interesting one because in this one, this is Bosco Verticale, the vertical garden by Boyer Studio. They calculated the micrometeorological studies and they carried out the calculations by the climatic characteristics, and they designed the facade of the buildings, the green of the buildings, the vegetation, and the plant distribution of each floor on each facade based on the orientation, based on the sun, based on the height, based on the microclimatic calculations they have made. So they are creating this its own, instead of creating those reflective facades. They are creating their own facades, and they are creating their own ecosystem in a way to with those plants and vegetation. Or another project, this is one of the projects I like, a smaller one, but it consists of these movable parts. So it is in Iran again. So based on the time of the year, they can rotate, or for example, in winter, they can be used as closed. In summertime, they can be used as open. So those semi-open spaces can be used, or there is a central void in the housing unit. So those voids can be used with those bridges, etc. So based on how they want to use the spaces, the technology can be used to create those interior semi-open open spaces, and changes the formation of that housing unit. Or also, this is an interesting example from Indonesia. It has some inspirations from vernacular architecture, but of course, this very wide span of the roof is interesting. But the interesting part of this project is the way it integrates the green with the project, and also it is using the basic vernacular approaches, how to use, how to relate it with the environment, how to use the topography, and so on. Also, when we are looking at the new examples, the 3D printed housing are also in fashion. We are seeing different examples of this kind of housing. Even though they have different materials and they have different CNC techniques, even with the Adobe, they are building different houses using CNC techniques. So it doesn't have to be smart materials. It can be traditional materials. But with these computational approaches, they are building different houses in that sense. So when we are looking at those computational approaches, if I start from the last one, these 3D fabrication methods, both with traditional and natural materials and even smart materials, we are starting to see it in different ways. Game engines, which I'm going to talk in a few seconds, and there were analysis using computational approaches and tools designed with developing technologies. So there were calculation powers of the computations, visualization powers from game engines, and even when you are designing some tools, either you are an expert or not, and using different materials, even though those smart and nano materials are not are still very expensive and not widespread yet. We are seeing this kind of approaches. In that sense, this is an interesting project, because in this study, our CISA designed these houses. These are in Malagueira, in Evora, in Portugal. So he designed based on the user preferences in a very long time, step-by-step cluster of houses, and based on the interviews and communications with the users, he arranged and designed each and every one of the unit himself. And then with computational approach, Jose Duarte worked on the design projects and interpreted and transported this knowledge to computer, and recreated this kind of all those kind of houses or alternatives in this way. The critical point in this study is CISA designed these houses with user participation based on the needs and requirements of the user, while Duarte's design, the user is not in the center, but the variation. So of course, there are houses for various type of users, but the change in the logic is that in this kind of a mass housing project, numerous variations are created rapidly, so that users can select. Not the houses are designed based on specific users' need, but variations are created so that they can select one that can accommodate for themselves. Or with the new game engines, renders and tools can be developed and designed, as I tried to mention. And these are some developed tools you can see, but also designers can also develop. So you don't need to be an expert in computational technologies right now to design. With those game engines, you can also design your own tool, or you can make your calculations. Of course, it is not that easy, as I explained, but still it is doable, and we are seeing lots of researches like that. Again, vernacular inspirations are also important, and tools can be generated with this kind of approach. This is, I want to mention one of my studies as well. This is one of my studies. It is from my master's thesis. So, with vernacular inspiration from the analysis of the Mardin houses, the typology and with the generation of the computer, housing typologies have been defined, and with that way, sustainable additions of new houses, or if you wish to generate new houses using the same language, it is doable. Or another tool, a decision support system, a decision support tool for the for an apartment block, based on the user's need and based on the organization of the facade, the alternatives can be generated much more quickly. And you can see these different plan layouts, facade organizations, etc. So this is also interesting and important. So in short, if I need to wrap it up, in the future of the housing, we are seeing more, at least the fewer attempts are for to have greener and sustainable housing alternatives, especially for energy efficient, green, more integrated with nature, using sustainable strategies. So in one way or another, the new sustainable approach is using one of those strategies. Material and structure, it is interesting, and extreme structures can be seen, as well as mobile examples, or even examples without foundations that are also important. New fabrication methods, we are seeing new innovative smart materials as well as new printing techniques. And we are seeing new forms. They don't have a common form, but more smooth, curvilinear, circular, organic forms can be built easier with the new technologies. And of course, with the parametric design strategies, it changes the understanding of how we are starting the design, how we are using the parameters of the design. But when we look at these new approaches, if we ask the question, where is the user in this design? It is a question, I think, to be discussed, because in all those approaches, the user is a little bit from the central point. It moved to a secondary, or even in the lower parts of the approach and usage, or let me phrase it this way. In the architecture, usually the users were on the central part, but now with those approaches, the user is not in the central part, and the approach is changed. We are now talking about architecture in different parts. We are talking about architecture in Mars. We are talking about using more smarter materials, etc. But we are usually trying to design with those futuristic approaches, or with computational approaches, and so on. So again, we maybe need to discuss where is the user in these designs. Thank you.
Thank you, Belinda Hocam. Thank you for the marvelous presentation. Dear all, do you have questions?
Sorry, it was a little bit long, but I hope you didn't.
Doesn't matter, Hocam. Doesn't matter. Thank you very much. Dear students, okay, I will look. Okay, this is thank you. You need, okay, because even you, Sarah, okay, you can read, Hocam. Okay, because even you build, but this is not a question. I think this is just a
comment.
Comment.
Yes, how are you going to include the community? That is the question. How are you going to include the community? So so there are different aspects in architecture. You have time limitations, you have economical limitations, you need to design sustainable. So as we mentioned, economical and social sustainability is important. Also, technology should be included in one way or another. So how are you going to do it? That is the critical point. How are you going to approach, and how are you going to do it?
maybe it's a good idea to include rooms for the community. So maybe kindergarten, or that you have big rooms for celebrations, so that you create a community.
To create some common spaces so that people can come together and use, for sure.
So thank you very much. Then we can finish
Thank
for
you,
today.
Termina.
Thank you. And then on Friday you are going to get a email again, a reminder. But see you soon on Friday. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, all students and instructors. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good day. Bye.